So here we have discussed different alternatives for assessing police candidates to see how they will respond and interact with the community. Again, this included looking at racial bias and overall attitudes in different ways. But from what we discussed earlier, it may not matter how police are testing at the beginning of, you know, their training. It matters how the culture of the police academy that they are going into is and what the police culture is like. Um, Other ideas for training include, um, or other alternatives include expanding the training and qualifications, again, adding a college education, teaching the racial history of the US and like why people commit crimes, you know, um, and increasing accountability while police officers, um, and adding a focus on mental health. But overall, um, there are continued limitations in all of this. Um, so when speaking about, racial difficulties with like racism, the demographics of the US police force is 75% white and male. Researchers have found that the more stereotypically black an individual phenotypically appears, the more likely disproportionate violence is to occur. There is no standard approach for how to address disproportionate racial contact. Um, and police work attracts people who endorse colorblind racial beliefs, which is not seeing color, and are reinforced through their career. Assigning a racial label to a face can influence one's perception of that face. So, this is all by Cowell. Um, and again, these are all difficulties. We can talk about the police force attending training on like like racism and like all of these things, but there are still these continued statistics that make it really hard, um, to enact any change. Well, then some people talk about, well, what about like body cameras and stuff? So, examinees recorded interactions of law enforcement, use of force through body worn camera and video footage, and it was found that this could elucidate the circumstances that impact an officer's decision to use force. So Cowell continued to say that, those body cameras can be really helpful. However, we have found that much of the data goes missing, um, in high stress or, in situations where the police officer could be harmed by people seeing what they were doing. And this also goes into the police culture of protecting other police officers. Um, you protect your own or whatever. And so we found that although people are supposed to use, cameras and things like that to always show what's going on, that police officers continue to protect themselves and protect each other. I've found some people have talked about, um, like live streaming police cameras onto the internet, and that would allow anybody at any time to see what's going on and, you know, how they're interacting with everyone. And then we couldn't have data just going missing. So that's one alternative to that. Um, I don't know how well that would go over because, again, then it would, they couldn't cover up things. But anyway, so Cowell continued, and they said a recent study found of the police forces of the 20 largest cities in the US. Of those cities, not a single department was operating under guidelines that are compliant with the minimum standards laid out under international human rights laws. So, looking at the UN, not a single of the largest cities in the US, and there were like 20 of them that were looked at, was operating under what the UN considered, um, you know, minimum standards for not violating human rights. According to a local Atlanta news source, the officer that killed Rayshard Brooks on June 12, 2020, had just completed a de-escalation training on April 24th and a deadly force training on January 9th. So we talk about how beneficial training can be, but we have this young man and like so many others who are murdered, and the police officers in the case of Rayshard Brooks literally had just completed not one but two trainings, not even within like a 6-month, a 12-month period. So this leads us to this final picture of some activists from organizations including Beyond Policing and MPD 150 have been calling for reprioritizing, defunding, and abolishing the police. So this might mean taking some of the funds from the police agencies and putting it towards education and putting it towards, housing, so that, instead of criminalizing homeless people, we could help house people without homes and help feed people and provide medical care to people who are, we don't have their basic needs met. So there's a lot of backlash on that. But when you look at it, the police agency has more money than a lot of other agencies combined. And so, there's a movement towards that. So looking back at what we had talked about, this is kind of talking about like the body cameras, and if there were, things that weren't filmed, and how to interact with that. This is talking about the cities that were not compliant with the UN's minimum for, human rights. This is Rayshard Brooks. This is talking about the more phenotypically black someone appears, or, even just the more phenotypically brown someone appears, because when we know that when we talk about like Black, Indigenous, people of color, although our language has revolved around like color of the skin, it's not color of the skin. It's the color of the skin, it's the nose, it's the facial feature, it's the body structure, it's the way your body carries weight, it's your eye shape and your eye color. And all of these things make up, people of like people of color, right? Even though we call it of color, it's all of these other things as well. But that study looked at Black people and Black individuals. But I think the same can be said for other racial minorities who also experience police violence. Indigenous people, Latino people, you know, South Asian people, all of that. This is talking about how most police officers are white. And then this is a picture saying that there was a time before police and there will be a time after. Um, so that's referring to defunding the police. So these are my references. Most of them, except for like one or two, I think are in the past 7 years of filming this video. This is in 2022. Um, and thank you so much for watching my presentation. I hope you the best and thanks. Bye.